When I caught my wife cheating, I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I sharpened my knives in the form of a paintbrush. I turned every filthy detail of her affair into art. So real, it would cut her to the bone. I knew something was wrong the moment her smile stopped reaching her eyes. Jessica always had this way of smiling where her whole face lit up, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Lately, that light was gone. She still smiled, of course, at friends, at strangers in the grocery store, even at me, sometimes, but it was different, like the warmth had been replaced with calculation. I tried to ignore it. People change. Work gets stressful. Married life shifts from passion to comfort. That's what I told myself as I sat at our kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, watching her bustle around in a crisp white blouse I hadn't seen her wear in years. It clung to her curves in a way that made my chest tighten, made me remember the nights when that same blouse would end up on the floor within minutes of her walking through the door. "You're dressed up?" I said, my voice casual, but my eyes lingered on the way her pencil skirt hugged her hips. She glanced at me briefly, then turned back to buttering toast. "Client lunch," she said. Her tone was light, but there was a tiny pause before client, like she was choosing the word carefully. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but the pause lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. That night, I was sitting on the couch, sketching absent-mindedly in my old notebook, when her phone lit up on the coffee table. Jessica was in the shower. The screen flashed with a message from a name I didn't recognize. Tyler Brooks. Can't stop thinking about last night. It felt like ice water had been poured down my spine. My hand hovered over the phone, every muscle in my body screaming to unlock it, scroll through, find out everything. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, staring at those words until the screen went dark, as if by keeping my distance I could convince myself I hadn't really seen it. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, droplets running down the smooth line of her neck, I found myself watching her like I hadn't in years. She bent over to pick up a hairbrush, the towel tightening across her ass, and my body reacted automatically. But there was something new in the way she avoided my gaze, something almost guilty. She caught me staring and smirked, the way she used to when she wanted to drag me into the bedroom, without words. For a second, I thought maybe I was overreacting, that the text meant nothing, that this was just my beautiful wife being her beautiful self. She walked past me, close enough for her thigh to brush mine, and whispered, "Don't wait up, I might be late again tomorrow." The next day, I found myself unable to focus on work. Every line I drew, every color I picked, was drowned in the memory of that text. Last night, what the hell happened last night? By Thursday, the questions were rotting in my head. That evening, she said she was meeting a long-term client at a place downtown. I nodded, kissed her goodbye, and 20 minutes later, I was in my car, tailing hers from 2 blocks back. It wasn't hard. Jessica never looked in the rear view for anything but makeup smudges. She parked near a small cafe with big windows, the kind where you could watch the street, while pretending to read a menu. I parked further down and walked past casually, pretending to check my phone. That's when I saw him, the man from the text. I assumed. Tall, mid-30s, perfect hair, expensive suit. He stood as she approached, smiling in a way that made my stomach clench. She smiled back, the full, radiant, sun-through-cloud smile that had been missing from me for months. They sat close, too close. Their knees brushed under the table. He leaned in, whispering something that made her laugh, a soft, intimate laugh that used to be mine. My chest was tight. I kept walking past the cafe, turned the corner, then doubled back through an alley so I could watch from the other side. After half an hour, they got up. He placed his hand on the small of her back as they walked to a waiting rideshare. When he opened the door for her, she turned and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was far too familiar for client behavior. I pulled out my phone, hand shaking, and recorded the whole thing. The car pulled away. I checked the address on the driver's app through the reflection in the cafe window. The Roosevelt Hotel. I could have gone home. I could have confronted her right then. I could have screamed, broken things, demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there in the cooling evening air, phone in my hand, heart hammering, and I felt something unexpected slide into place inside me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't want to just end our marriage. I wanted to create something lasting, something that would make her remember every single time she saw it, exactly what she'd thrown away. And I already knew how. The morning after I saw Jessica disappear into the Roosevelt Hotel with him, She came home smelling faintly of perfume and something else. Something I couldn't name, but my body recognized. The kind of scent you only get after skin has been pressed against skin for a long time. She walked into the kitchen wearing one of my shirts, her hair damp from a shower, her bare legs glowing in the morning light. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, poured herself coffee, and asked if I'd slept well. I told her I had. That was a lie. Every minute of the night had been haunted by flashes of them together, his hands on her waist, her lips parting for him. It wasn't just a betrayal that burned. It was knowing how she must have looked in that moment, how she must have sounded. And the worst part was that I couldn't stop imagining it in vivid detail. When she leaned over me to grab a plate from the cupboard, her shirt slid just enough to reveal the curve of her breast, and my pulse jumped. I hated myself for wanting her in that moment, for thinking about sliding my hand up the back of her thigh, pulling her onto my lap, claiming what was mine. But I stayed still, letting her move away. She was dressed and gone by 8. Another client meeting, she said, kissing my cheek lightly like a friend would. The house felt colder after she left. I tried to bury myself in work, but my mind kept wandering. I opened her Facebook page, then closed it again. I scrolled through Instagram, the same carefully curated shots, sunsets, coffee mugs, vague captions about loving life. No sign of him. No evidence. She was good at hiding things. That evening, she texted that she'd be late. Again, I didn't follow her this time. Instead, I sat in my garage, staring at the dusty easel I hadn't touched in years. The idea that had taken root last night started to grow. If I wanted to hurt her, I could scream at her, throw her out, let her walk away and paint me as a bad guy. But that wasn't enough. No, I wanted her to see herself through my eyes. I wanted the world to see her the way I had seen her last night. Beautiful, yes, but tainted by the truth. I pulled out an old canvas and began sketching. The strokes came easily, almost too easily, my pencil capturing the slight tilt of her head as she looked at him, the arch of her back as she leaned into his touch. The memory was seared into me. Hours passed. I didn't notice the time until I heard her car in the driveway. I quickly covered the canvas with an old sheet. She came in smiling faintly, the scent of a man's cologne lingering on her clothes. Long day, she sighed, kicking off her heels. She poured herself a glass of wine, then sat next to me on the couch, her bare foot brushing my leg. Her skin was warm, her body loose in a way it hadn't been with me in months. It was the afterglow of someone who'd been satisfied. "Want to watch a movie?" she asked. I looked at her, at the soft curve of her lips, the faint flush in her cheeks. My hand almost reached for her thigh before I stopped myself. "Maybe later," I said, standing up. "I've got some work to finish." Her eyes narrowed slightly, just for a moment. Then she smiled again. "All right, Mr. Busy." In the garage, I uncovered a canvas and stared at the beginnings of her betrayal taking shape. There was a strange pleasure in it, in freezing that moment forever. Not for revenge yet, not for anyone else to see, just for me. Over the next few days, I watched her more closely. I began to notice patterns. The way she'd change her earrings after work, how her makeup was just a little heavier on client days, the small, satisfied hum she made while cooking, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. Once, on a Saturday morning, she bent over to take laundry out of the dryer, and the sight of her panties hugging her curves made my breath catch. She caught me looking and smirked knowingly, like she still had me wrapped around her finger. Maybe she thought she could keep both lives running side by side without me ever finding out. But I already knew, and instead of confronting her, I was feeding on the knowledge. Each lie she told me was another brushstroke. Each time she came home smelling like him, I found new details to add to the canvas. The exact shade of red in her lipstick, the way her hair curled slightly after being pressed into a pillow. I was building something piece by piece, and she had no idea she was the centerpiece of my work. One night, as she slept beside me, her body turned away, I reached out and traced my finger down her spine. She shifted slightly, murmuring something in her sleep. For a moment, I almost woke her, almost turned her over and kissed her until she forgot his name. Instead, I pulled my hand back and stared at the ceiling. The image of her with Tyler was clearer than ever in my mind, and I knew then that my first painting was only the beginning. It was the way she kissed me goodbye that morning that made my decision for me. Soft, brief, no tongue, just enough to say we're married, but not enough to say I want you. She was already somewhere else in her mind, and I had a pretty good idea where. Jessica said she was meeting an important client for lunch. I asked which one. She rattled off a name I'd never heard before, then busied herself with her phone before I could press further. The moment her car turned the corner, I grabbed my jacket and keys. This time, I wasn't just following her out of suspicion. I was hunting for the moment that would seal everything, the image that would be burned into me so deeply I could reproduce it in paint without ever forgetting a single detail. She drove across town, past the glass towers and busy cafes, into an older part of the city where the sidewalks still had cracks and the buildings wore ivy like scars. She parked in front of a boutique hotel with white stone columns and gold-trimmed windows. I didn't need to see the sign to know the name, the Roosevelt. I parked a block away and kept my distance as she walked toward the entrance. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from a strange, dark thrill. Tyler was already waiting outside. He wasn't in a suit this time, just jeans, a fitted shirt, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. When he saw her, his smile was easy, like this wasn't the first time, like this was routine. They didn't rush inside. They lingered on the steps, close enough that his hand brushed her hip. I saw her laugh at something he said, tilting her head the way she used to with me when she was teasing. Then she reached up and kissed him. Not quick, not shy, slow, with her body leaning into his. It was like a camera shutter clicked in my mind. That was the pose. That was the painting. They disappeared through the doors. I waited a full minute before I followed. Inside, the lobby was quiet, scented faintly with jasmine and polished wood. I pretended to check my phone near the elevator, just in time to see the two of them step in. Jessica pressed a button near the top. The doors closed. I didn't need to see more to know what was about to happen, but part of me wanted to. I took the stairs two at a time until I reached the floor I'd memorized. I waited down the hall, just far enough to hear without being seen. A door clicked open. Laughter, then the low, unmistakable sound of kissing. The next sounds were worse or better, depending on how you looked at it. A soft moan from her, the thud of her back against the wall, his voice low and rough as he said her name. I walked away before I heard more. I didn't want the whole movie. I just needed enough to keep replaying in my head until it was perfect on canvas. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My chest was tight, but not from grief. No, this was fuel. Pure, potent fuel. That night, she came home late again. She'd changed her clothes, but I could still see the faint flush in her cheeks, the post-sex looseness in her movements. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing my cheek. Client meeting ran over. I looked at her and smiled like I believed her, like I was still her safe, clueless husband. She didn't notice the faint smudge of lipstick near her ear, or that her hair still had the tiniest kink in it from where his fingers had been. After dinner, she went to take a shower. I went to the garage. The first painting was already halfway done, the cafe scene from the week before. Now I began the second, the hotel steps, her hand on his chest, his fingers brushing the edge of her blouse. The way her body curved into his, like belonged there. I worked for hours, lost in the rhythm of brush and color. The anger was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about creation, about turning her betrayal into something undeniable, immortal. By the time I cleaned my brushes, it was past midnight. She was asleep in bed, her breathing soft and even. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her. Her skin glowed faintly in the lamplight, and my mind betrayed me with thoughts of how warm she must have felt against him just hours ago. How she looked when she unbuttoned that blouse. How her voice might have broken when she whispered his name. I hated it. I wanted it. I was going to make her see it. And when I did, she would never be able to look away. The garage smelled like turpentine and dust, and for the first time in years, that scent made me feel alive. I hadn't touched a brush seriously since college. Life got in the way. Jobs, bills, marriage. Painting was something I used to do in the spaces between responsibilities, when I could still lose myself in color without worrying about deadlines. But now I had a reason. It started with the cafe painting, then the hotel steps. I didn't need to force myself into work. It pulled me in like a tide that had been waiting all these years to drag me under. Every line, every blend of shadow and light was precise. This wasn't just art. It was a record, a confession she didn't know she was making. Jessica thought I was designing new graphics for a client. That was the excuse. She'd come into the garage sometimes, see me hunched over the easel, and smile faintly before drifting away. She never lifted the sheets that covered the canvases. One night, while she was out, late dinner with a new client, I worked on the smallest detail yet. The look in her eyes as she leaned into Tyler. It wasn't just lust. It was surrender. That subtle, parted lip breath she used to give me when she wanted sex. The way her gaze softened, like she was all ready as before he touched her. I painted it exactly as I remembered it. And as I worked, I felt my chest tighten, not with rage, but with something darker. I could still remember how it felt to be on the receiving end of that look. The way my pulse would jump, the way my body would react instantly. Now it was his. I kept painting. When she came home, I heard the front door click, her heels on the hardwood. I didn't cover the canvas in time. She poked her head in, wine glass in hand. "Still at it?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Her blouse was loose, but the top 2 buttons were undone, revealing just enough to make my eyes linger. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "Almost done with this one." She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes flicking toward the painting before I stepped subtly in front of it. "When are you going to let me see what you've been working on?" "Soon," I said. "Not yet." She smiled, the same teasing curve of her lips she used when we were first dating. "I'll be patient." Then she turned and walked away, hips swaying just enough to make me wonder if she knew I was watching. I stayed in the garage after she went to bed. My mind was full of images. Her in that hotel room, her blouse slipping off her shoulder, the arch of her back as he pressed her against the wall. I hated how vivid it was. I hated how much of it I wanted to capture. By the weekend, I had 3 paintings done. Each one told part of the story, though to anyone else they might seem like unrelated romantic scenes. I knew better, and so would she when the time came. I started thinking bigger. What if I turned this into a full series? A progression, beginning with innocence, or at least the illusion of it, and ending in raw exposure. The idea made my pulse quicken. It wasn't just revenge anymore, it was an exhibit. Something public, something unforgettable. That Saturday, I told Jessica I'd be gone most of the day looking for new inspiration. I drove downtown and visited a small gallery in the Pearl District. White walls, soft lighting, enough space for a dozen or so pieces. The curator, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, seemed interested when I explained I was working on a deeply personal series. We settled on a date 2 months away. Plenty of time to finish. That night, Jessica curled up next to me on the couch, wearing one of my old T-shirts and nothing else. Her bare legs brushed mine, and the warmth of her skin sent a shiver up my spine. She leaned her head on my shoulder, smelling faintly of lavender and something muskier underneath. "You've been different lately," she murmured. "Different how?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She shrugged, focused, quiet, mysterious. Her hand slid down my arm, fingers brushing my thigh. For a moment, I wanted to give in, to pull her into my lap, to remind her whose name she used to cry out. But I didn't. I just smiled faintly and said, "Guess I'm just inspired." She gave me a look I couldn't quite read, then leaned in to kiss me. It was soft at first, then deeper, her tongue brushing mine, a taste of wine and something I didn't want to name. My body reacted, but my mind was elsewhere, picturing her kissing him with that same hunger. I pulled back before it went further, muttering something about needing to check my work. She didn't protest. In the garage, under the hum of the single light bulb, I stood before the canvases. 3 down, more to go. I could already see the entire sequence in my head. Every brushstroke leading to the moment she'd have to face it all at once. The artist in me was awake, and I wasn't going back to sleep. The trick to hiding something in plain sight is to make sure everyone thinks they're already in on the secret. That's what I told myself as I sat at my computer, typing up a short artist statement for the gallery's website. A study of modern love in its many forms: devotion, distance, desire, and betrayal. The word betrayal would raise eyebrows, maybe even questions. But the beauty was that nobody would know whose story they were looking at until the night of the show. Jessica would read it, and her mind would jump to other people, never herself. At dinner that night, I casually mentioned I'd been invited to show my work in a small gallery downtown. She raised her eyebrows, smiling like she was impressed. "That's amazing, Ethan. What's the theme?" "Relationships," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "How they change over time." Her smile warmed. "Sounds beautiful." She reached across the table and brushed her fingers over mine, the gesture so tender that for a second I almost forgot the hotel, the kisses, the way she tilted her head when Tyler spoke. Almost. We finished dinner with easy conversation, the kind that made it seem like we were still the couple everyone envied. Afterward, she curled up next to me on the couch, her legs over mine, her t-shirt riding high enough to reveal the smooth skin of her thigh. I felt the heat radiating from her, and for a moment I wondered if she was doing this out of guilt or habit. "Can I see what you've done so far?" she asked softly. "Not yet," I said with a faint smile. "I want you to be surprised." She pouted playfully, then leaned in and kissed me, slow, lingering, with just enough tongue to make me remember the early days of our marriage. My body reacted immediately, traitorously. I could have taken her right there. I wanted to, but the thought of her kissing him the same way kept my hand still. When she went to bed, I stayed up, working on another piece. This one wasn't pulled from memory of what I'd seen, but from imagination. The hotel room, her blouse half off, Tyler's hand on her bare thigh. I didn't need to know the exact details to make it real. The painting was more suggestion than fact, but anyone who'd been there would know exactly what it meant. Over the next week, I started laying the groundwork for the public version of my process. I posted a few vague updates on social media, close-up shots of brushstrokes, an empty easel with a cup of coffee beside it, captions about creative breakthroughs. Friends and acquaintances liked and commented with encouragement. Some even asked if Jessica was my muse. Yes, I replied every time. It wasn't a lie. I made a point to talk about the project with mutual friends when Jessica was around. It's all about truth and love. I'd say, watching her from the corner of my eye. She'd nod along, proud, unsuspecting. The gallery owner checked in one afternoon to ask about the pieces. I told her they were coming along perfectly. "It's a personal story," I explained. "People will feel it. They always do when it's real," she said. That night, Jessica came home later than usual. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair a little messy, her perfume stronger than normal. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned in the kitchen doorway, watching me prep vegetables for dinner. "You've been working so hard lately," she said. "You should take a break." I glanced at her over my shoulder. "What did you have in mind?" She smiled, slow and deliberate, then walked over, pressing herself against my back. Her hand slid around my waist, her lips brushing my ear. "Maybe we could go upstairs." It would have been easy to turn off the stove, take her hand, and follow her up without a word. But I didn't. Not because I didn't want her, God, I did, but because I wanted her to want me more later, when the walls were closing in. "I can't," I murmured. "Deadline." She pulled back, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "All right, later, then." When she left the kitchen, I exhaled slowly, my knuckles white around the knife handle. The desire was still there, tangled with anger, feeding the images in my head. Images that would soon be hanging on the gallery's white walls for everyone to see. By the end of the week, I had 6 canvases in progress. Each one sharper, more intimate than the last. And the more I painted, the more I realized this wasn't just about exposing her. It was about showing myself and maybe the world what happens when love curdles into something else. Something you can frame. The thing about a painting is that the truth hides in the small things, not the obvious gestures or poses. Anyone can fake those. It's in the curve of a smile, the way a shirt wrinkles, the shade of lipstick that bleeds just slightly into the corners of the mouth. I started to think of my studio as a crime scene. Each new canvas wasn't just a picture. It was evidence, and I was building the case detail by detail, brushstroke by brushstroke. One night, Jessica was in the shower, steam curling out from under the bathroom door. I stood at the dresser, looking at the earrings she'd worn the night she met Tyler at the cafe, small gold hoops I'd bought her for our anniversary. She hadn't worn them in months before that day. I set them on my workbench later, painting their exact curve in the background of one piece, a tiny golden glint barely visible unless you knew where to look. The next morning, she left early. I wandered the house, gathering more of these small, invisible fingerprints. A wine glass she favored, a scarf with a faint perfume that wasn't mine, even a photograph from our wedding. I repainted her bouquet into one of the hotel scenes, replacing the flowers with red lilies, their petals curling open like mouths. It became an obsession. Each time she came home late, I studied her like a photographer studies light. A smudge of mascara at the corner of her eye, a faint mark on her neck that she covered with makeup, but not quite well enough. I painted them all. One Thursday night, she came in wearing that same white blouse from the morning I'd first noticed her change. It clung to her, slightly rumpled, as if it had been handled roughly. She tossed her bag on the couch and loosened the top buttons, revealing the delicate line of her collarbone. "You've been staring at me a lot lately," she said with a smirk. Just inspired, I answered, letting my gaze trail slowly down her body. I wanted her to feel the heat in my eyes, to think it was lust. And it was in part, but I was also memorizing the way the fabric folded at her waist, the subtle indentation where his hand might have gripped her. That night, I painted until my fingers cramped. The blouse, the tilt of her head, the almost imperceptible smile, that wasn't for me. By the time I was done, the image was so real it made my stomach knot. Anyone else would see a beautiful woman in an intimate pose. Jessica would see herself exactly as she'd been with him. The next weekend, we were invited to a dinner party at a friend's place. Jessica wore a black dress with slit up the side, her hair loose and falling over her shoulders. She looked incredible. I caught other men glancing at her, and a part of me, the part that still remembered what it was like to have her want me, flared with possessiveness. Halfway through the evening, she disappeared for a few minutes. When she returned, her lipstick was freshly reapplied, her hair slightly mussed. I didn't need to guess where she'd been texting from. I filed away in my mind, already imagining how to capture that look on canvas, the subtle afterglow, the awareness of having done something she shouldn't. By the middle of the month, I had 9 paintings in various stages of completion, each one layered with these tiny, damning truths. A certain cafe logo blurred in the background, the exact pattern of the hotel's hallway carpet, a shadow that suggested a man's hand just out of frame. To anyone else, these would just be artistic choices. But for Jessica and Tyler, they'd be like shards of glass and skin, impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. One evening, she wandered into the garage holding a glass of wine. "You're shutting yourself away more and more," she said lightly. "Deadlines," I told her, without looking up from the canvas. She stepped closer, and I could feel her presence behind me, warm, faintly scented with the perfume she didn't wear for me anymore. "I hope I'm in at least one of these," she teased. I glanced at her over my shoulder. "You're in all of them," I said. She laughed, not realizing I wasn't joking, and walked out. When I was alone again, I stood in front of my work and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and hunger that had been growing in me for weeks. The details were almost complete. The story was almost ready to be told. And soon, she'd be standing in a room full of people, surrounded by every secret she thought she'd kept hidden. The paintings were nearly finished. I would walk in the garage at night and feel like I was stepping into another world, one where every wall was lined with pieces of Jessica's double life. The air smelled of oil paint and turpentine, heavy with the quiet hum of my own satisfaction. The series told the story exactly as I'd envisioned, beginning with a hint of intimacy, building through unspoken touches, and ending in full exposure. Now it was time to make sure the right audience would be there to see it. I designed the invitations myself. Thick ivory cardstock with gold embossed lettering, the kind you'd expect for a wedding or a gala. On the front, behind closed doors, a study in love. On the back, the date, the gallery address, and a single quote in small italic script. All art is truth, and all truth is art. I printed 50. 20 would go to friends, family, and a few of my old art contacts. Another 15 would go to people Jessica knew well, co-workers, mutual friends, even her parents. The rest were for people who would hurt the most to have in that room. Tyler Brooks got one, hand-delivered to the front desk of his office building, in a plain envelope marked personal. I didn't include a return address. His fiancée, Rachel, got her own copy, mailed directly to her home. I imagined her opening it, thinking it was some chic social event, having no idea she was holding a loaded gun. I sent one to the gallery's mailing list as well, ensuring there would be strangers in the room. Strangers who would ask questions. Strangers who would talk. Jessica saw me sealing envelopes one evening and raised an eyebrow. "Is this for the show?" "Yeah," I said casually, licking the flap of another envelope, making sure we get a good turnout. She walked over, peering at the stack. "Wow, these are beautiful. Did you make them yourself?" I nodded. Graphic design degree finally pays off. She laughed, kissed me on the cheek, and wandered off, humming. I could tell she was pleased, proud, even at the idea of being on my arm the night of the exhibition. The thought made my stomach twist with something between anticipation and dark amusement. Over the next week, I mailed or delivered every invitation. I was careful to stagger the timing, so no one would suspect a pattern. The gallery confirmed the date was set, the lighting would be adjusted to my specifications, and the pieces would be hung in the order I requested. I'd already mapped out the sequence, each painting leading seamlessly into the next, drawing the viewer deeper into the narrative until there was no way to miss the truth. One night, After Jessica had gone to bed, I sat in the garage holding one of the few remaining invitations. My thumb traced the raised letters as I pictured the moment she'd see the final piece. She'd feel it first, the icy realization crawling up her spine, and then she'd know. The entire room would know. It was almost erotic, the thought of her being stripped bare, without a single piece of clothing coming off. 2 days later, Tyler replied to the gallery's RSVP email. "Looking forward to it," he wrote. I read it 3 times, imagining his smug grin. He had no idea he'd just confirmed his own public execution. Rachel didn't respond, but I didn't expect her to. She'd either show up out of curiosity or stay home, thinking it was some highbrow bore. Either way, her name was on the guest list. The night before the show, Jessica leaned over me on the couch, wearing a silk robe that felt just enough to reveal the swell of her breasts. "Tomorrow's the big night," she said softly. "You nervous?" "Not at all." I lied, my pulse steady. She smiled and kissed me, slow and warm, her hand sliding over my chest. For a second, I almost forgot myself. Almost. But then the image of her outside the Roosevelt with Tyler flashed in my mind, and I pulled back. "Don't stay up too late," I said, standing. "We have a long day tomorrow." She pouted playfully, but I didn't linger. In the garage, I checked each canvas one more time, tightening the wires on the backs, making sure every surface was flawless. When I finally turned out the light, I knew the trap was set. Tomorrow, the doors would open, and the truth would be waiting for her on every wall. The gallery opening was less than 48 hours away, and every painting was in place except one. The last piece, the one that would end her, still sat in the garage under a plain white sheet. It wasn't because I hadn't painted it. It was done. It was perfect. I just didn't want to look at it too long before the night. Not because it hurt, it didn't anymore, but because I didn't want to dull the effect. I wanted to see it fresh again when it was hanging under the gallery lights, surrounded by the hum of quiet conversation and the clink of wine glasses. That morning, Jessica was in a rare good mood. She made coffee, humming softly, wearing only one of my old shirts. The sight of her bare legs brushing past me in the kitchen was almost enough to make me forget the plan. "Almost. You're awfully cheerful," I said. She smiled. "Big night tomorrow. I'm proud of you, Ethan. Really proud." I looked at her over the rim of my mug. She had no idea. None. She left for work around 9. I spent the rest of the day at the gallery, overseeing the installation. The curator walked through the space with me, nodding at the arrangement. "You've created a narrative here," she said. "It's intimate, almost invasive in a good way." "Truth usually is," I replied. The pieces led the viewer down a quiet slope, small, tender moment at first, then gradually more charged, more revealing. By the time you reach the end of the row, the story was undeniable, and the final painting, the kill shot, would hang alone on the far wall, under a single spotlight. When the last hook was set, I brought the final piece in. I kept it covered until it was in position. The curator glanced at me as I pulled the sheet away. Her eyes widened slightly. "That's bold." I didn't explain. I didn't need to. That night, back home, Jessica was already in bed when I came in from the garage. She rolled over, smiling sleepily. "Everything ready?" "Everything," I said. She reached for me, her hand brushing my thigh under the blanket. "Come here." I hesitated. Her skin was warm, her breath soft against my neck. For a moment, I thought about letting myself have her one last time before the destruction. But then I remembered the way her lips had parted for Tyler, the way her fingers had curled into his shirt. I pulled back. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "In the morning." She tried again, a kiss over coffee, her hand lingering on my chest, but I stayed cool, detached. She probably thought it was nerves. By noon, I was back at the gallery for final adjustments. I checked the lighting, making sure the last piece was lit just enough to catch the eyes from across the room. Too much, and it would be too obvious. Too little, and someone might walk past it without feeling that cold jolt of recognition. I stepped back, looking at the sequence one more time. From the first to the last, it was a confession written in paint. Only 2 people in the room tomorrow would understand every detail, and both of them would wish they didn't. Late that night, I stood in the garage, staring at the empty space where the final painting had been. The walls looked naked without it. I imagined Jessica here, walking in, seeing the bare hooks and asking where it went. I imagined her face tomorrow when she saw it again, not in the privacy of our home, but surrounded by people. The The thought made my pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with power. When I went to bed, she was curled on her side, the curve of her hip under the blanket almost too tempting to ignore. I lay awake beside her, rehearsing the night in my mind. The guests arriving, the small talk, the glasses of wine, the murmurs of admiration, and then, at the end of the room, the hush, the stillness, and Jessica's smile shattering. Tomorrow it would all be real. The gallery smelled faintly of wine, fresh flowers, and clean white walls, that scent of anticipation you get right before something starts. People were already arriving when I stepped to the door in my charcoal suit, the one Jessica always said made me look dangerous. She was on my arm, radiant in a deep emerald dress that clung to her in ways that made people turn their heads. Her hair was loose, tumbling over her bare shoulders. She'd taken extra care tonight. Not for me, I suspected, but for the audience. Or maybe for him. "Babe, this place is beautiful," she whispered, squeezing my arm. I smiled. "It will be." The first guests were friends, colleagues, acquaintances from the art world. There was laughter, small talk, the clink of glasses. I watched as Jessica drifted into conversations, charming as ever, telling people she was proud of me. She played the perfect supportive wife. And then Tyler walked in. He was alone. No Rachel. He scanned the room, spotted Jessica, and smiled in that slow, confident way. I felt her body tense just slightly beside me. She didn't acknowledge him immediately. Smart. But her eyes flicked toward him once, twice. I greeted more guests, keeping my tone warm, my smile easy, but inside I was counting down. The paintings were arranged in a loose arc along the walls. People moved from one to the next, murmuring, leaning in, pointing out details. I stayed back at first, letting the work do the talking. From across the room, I saw Jessica looking at the first piece, the cafe scene. She tilted her head, frowning slightly. Her lips moved as if she were explaining something to the woman beside her. Then she smiled, but it was thinner than before. By the time she reached the hotel steps painting, she'd gone quiet. I saw her eyes dart toward Tyler, who was on the opposite side of the room, studying another canvas. I joined a group near the center, sipping my drink, answering questions about my process. Words like intimacy, truth, and vulnerability came easily, but my mind was fixed on her slow progress toward the far wall. It was almost erotic watching her peel back each layer of the story without knowing she was doing it. Half an hour in, the crowd had formed a loose current, everyone moving toward the end of the room. I drifted that way, close enough now to hear the murmurs around the third-to-last piece. "God, it feels so personal," someone whispered. Jessica was standing a few feet from it, arms folded, her lips pressed tight. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to the painting. Tyler had made his way there too, and for the first time, they looked directly at each other. Just a brief glance, but it was enough. His face didn't move, but his jaw tightened. I let them move ahead of me, weaving through the guests. The tension between them was a live wire. Then she saw it, the second-to-last painting, and I saw her mask slip, just for a heartbeat. Recognition flashed in her eyes, sharp and undeniable. She looked at me across the space. I smiled faintly, then turned my gaze to the final wall. From where I stood, I could see her shoulders square, her breathing change. She was hesitating now, standing just before the bend that would reveal the last piece. The hum of conversation around her seemed to fade. Tyler was still a step behind, his expression unreadable. I stayed where I was, drink in hand, the picture calm. She took the step. Her back stiffened. Even from here, I could feel the air shift. People near her went quiet, drawn in by the solitary spotlight at the end of the room. The last painting, her in Tyler's arms, the unmistakable curve of her face, the details so precise no one could mistake her. The silence spread outward like a ripple in a still pond. Jessica didn't move. Tyler was frozen beside her, and I was finally enjoying the show. The room felt heavier now. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It spreads when enough people understand they're looking at something they shouldn't. Jessica's back was still to me, but I could see the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her hands hung frozen at her sides. Tyler stood half a step behind her, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the painting. The final piece was lit just enough to capture every detail. Jessica in Tyler's arms, her face tilted up toward him, his lips brushing hers. The background, the hotel window, glowed faintly in the dusk light I'd recreated from memory. Her blouse hung half off her shoulder, her hair tumbling the way it had the day I'd followed them. I'd painted it with surgical precision. A woman near the wall murmured something to her friend. Not quite a whisper, but low enough that I only caught fragments. Looks like her. Can't be. Jessica turned then, searching for me in the crowd. Her eyes found mine, and for the first time in years, she looked genuinely afraid. I didn't move. Tyler's gaze shifted from the painting to me, and I saw the realization harden in his expression. He knew. He'd put it together. But he wasn't going to make a scene. Men like him don't throw punches in public. They calculate their exits. More people gathered around the final wall, the hush broken by small bursts of conversation. I drifted closer, not rushing, letting the tension pull me forward like gravity. When I reached them, Jessica stepped toward me, her voice low but sharp. "What the hell is this?" "It's art," I said evenly. "Art always comes from truth." Her eyes flashed. "You think this is clever?" "You!" She stopped herself, aware of the people listening. Tyler shifted, his voice a calm murmur. "This is slander." I smiled faintly. "Only if it's not true." The curator approached, glancing between us. "Everything okay here?" "Just a discussion about technique." I said smoothly. Jessica's been very involved in my process. A few people laughed quietly, unsure if it was a joke. Jessica's face reddened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Rachel arrived then. I saw her out of the corner of my eye. She'd come after all. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze locking on the painting, then on Tyler, then on Jessica. Her expression went cold, and in that moment, I knew the collateral damage would be complete. Jessica turned back to me, her voice breaking just enough to let me hear it. "Why?" I stepped closer, so only she could hear. "Because I wanted you to see yourself the way I do, and I wanted them to see it too." She took a half step back like I'd hit her. Tyler muttered something to her. I couldn't hear it, and started toward the door. Rachel followed a few seconds later, her heels clicking sharp against the floor. Jessica stayed rooted, her breathing shallow, eyes still on the painting. The guests began to drift, some moving to the wine table, others murmuring in small knots, glancing back at her. I left her there, walking to the center of the room to greet a couple who'd just arrived. My smile was easy, my tone warm, as though nothing unusual had happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jessica finally move, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't follow. By the time I looked toward the door again, she was gone. The gallery was nearly empty when I stepped outside into the cool night air. The buzz of the evening was still in my ears, the muted gasps, the low voices, the weight of eyes turning toward that final wall. I could still feel Jessica's gaze on me, burning, questioning, hating. But she hadn't come back. Tyler was gone. Rachel was gone. Jessica had vanished without a goodbye. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the city air, the faint scent of rain on pavement. My hands were steady. My chest was calm. I thought I might feel a rush of triumph, some euphoric sense of victory. Instead, there was only quiet. When I went back inside, the curator was locking up. "Congratulations," she said, smiling faintly. That was unforgettable. Exactly what I was going for. I told her. I loaded the unsold pieces into my car, leaving the final painting in the gallery for the next week as planned. That one had already drawn 3 inquiries from collectors. The idea that someone might hang it in their home amused me. In a way, I didn't bother to examine too closely. At home, the house was dark. Her car was gone. On the kitchen counter was a single envelope with my name on it. Inside was a short note. "You've destroyed everything. I hope you're happy." I set it down without reading it again. In the days that followed, the fallout rippled through our circle. Friends called, some pretending not to know, others asking outright if the rumors were true. Tyler's name disappeared from Jessica's social media. Rachel posted a photo of herself alone on a beach with the caption, "Fresh starts." Jessica didn't come back to the house. She sent a lawyer instead. The divorce papers were clean, straightforward. No contest over property. She just wanted out. I signed them without hesitation. The garage felt different now. I kept going in out of habit, standing in front of the empty space where the paintings had hung. The work was done. The purpose that kept me awake for weeks was gone, replaced by a strange, restless energy. One afternoon, I found myself staring at a blank canvas. My hands itched the brush, but I didn't know what to put there. Without the anger, without the fuel, the blankness was just blankness. The final painting sold 2 weeks later. The buyer asked no questions about the subjects, and I offered none. That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey, the city lights blinking in the distance. I thought about the first moment I'd suspected, that faint, intimate text glowing on her phone, the way my heart had sunk and hardened in the same breath. I'd wanted her to feel exposed, to strip away the safety she thought she had. And I'd done it. She'd walked into that gallery smiling, and she'd walked out shattered. But as I sat there, the glass cool in my hand, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. The revenge wasn't for her. It had never been for her. It was for me, to prove that I could take what was mine and twist it into something she couldn't erase. To make the truth permanent, framed and hung for strangers to see. And maybe, somewhere in the middle of all that, it was also to remind myself that I was still capable of creating something that made people stop, stare, and feel something they couldn't quite name. The night air was still. I looked at the blank canvas leaning against the garage wall. It waited, patient, unjudging. I took another sip of whiskey and stood, walking toward it. Time for a new story.